But the story of fintech over the years has been one of incredible challenge of success, new models of banking, fundraising, investing, and payments. So let's talk about it some more. To kick us off today, I'm going to be speaking to two people who've been at the heart of that transformation. Lisa Jacobs is the CEO of Funding Circle. Founded in 2010, it's one of the largest online platforms for business loans in the world. It's listed on the London Stock Exchange, and it's helped over 135,000 businesses borrow £15.2 billion to take their business further. And joining Lisa is Jaidev Janardana, CEO of Zopa. Now, what began as the world's first peer-to-peer lending company in 2005 has since pivoted, and in 2020 launched Zopa Bank to offer its customers a wider range of financial products. And under Jaidev's leadership, Zopa has more than quadrupled its loan volumes and revenues, achieved profitability, and secured its banking license. So please welcome Jaidev and Lisa to the stage. Jaidev, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us up here, and welcome to the summit. Now, it's quite a reflective one in many senses, one where we're going to be looking back at what's been achieved and what we want to be achieving in the next 5 or 10 years or so. I mean, let's just start there, in fact, and if I could start with you, Lisa. I mean, how would you assess the sort of key impact of the sector over that time? I mean, you've been in it pretty much since the start.
Yeah, it's been a long time, actually. And I think we talk about it quite a lot, but it is true that there's been two really core impacts of the fintech sector. One has been financial inclusion. If you look at what technology has done, ultimately, it's enabled us to serve at a much cheaper cost people, communities who weren't being served beforehand. And that's opened up a huge amount of inclusion. So for Funding Circle, we provide loans to small businesses, typically £70,000. And prior to Funding Circle existing, they were an underserved group, both from a service point of view and from an access point of view. And we've opened up that community. And you see the same thing happening again and again. You think about small businesses with point-of-sale systems, and previously you had to buy these big, hefty ones that everyone will remember from the shops, which cost thousands of pounds, and now you can buy a 20-quid card reader. So it's a huge amount of financial inclusion that has happened. And the second thing has been choice and competition has driven such a massive improvement in the provision of financial services. You look at the way that fintechs have approached what they do, and it's very customer-centric. So the products, the propositions that are offered are much better. There are features that traditional sector would never think to include. And that's created a big change, I believe, in the traditional sector as well. And they've had to step up. They've had to improve. So over the last couple of decades, we've seen a huge improvement in the provision of those financial services.
Jaidev, how about you? What do you think the main impact's been?
Of course, I would agree with what Lisa said here. I think we've dragged the financial services industry and the incumbents, kicking and screaming at times, into the 21st century, right? So products are far more simpler, easier to use. The experience is intuitive and digital, so that's been great. But I think in particularly today's time, I think the most relevant thing that we have done is actually effectively let people have more of their money. We are talking about a cost of living crisis, and across the board, fintech has helped reduce the cost of using financial services. So if you start with something as simple as traveling on a holiday, things like Wise or fee-free credit or debit cards that people like Zopa, Monzo, Revolut do, has meant that you don't actually have to pay tons of money to exchange your money. If you think about borrowing, about 10 years ago, if you wanted to borrow on a loan, what rate would you get, whether you'd get approved or not? It was a bit of a crapshoot, right? And today, pioneered by people like us, you can actually get instantly what's the rate you're going to get. You're going to get approved or not, and leaving you free to actually shop around and find the best deal, right? And lastly, I think a very topical issue is savings. So if you look at the savings rates that some of the incumbents have been providing in a world where base rates have been going up, inflation has been going up, they have just really lagged behind. And if I look at some of the recent stats that I've seen across the fintechs and some of the neobanks that have come across, I think this year we'll deliver more than 600 million in interest back to UK savers, which I think in today's time is incredibly important. So clearly, financial inclusion is a big thing, easier to use for financial services, but ultimately the big thing is that I think we are leaving more money for UK consumers and UK businesses to do what they want to do. And I think that is the biggest impact that we've had.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by how you guys have done it, and it is notable actually, looking at the dates of your progress. Funding Circle launched in 2010. It was a response to the financial crisis. And of course you pivoted in 2020, right at the middle of the pandemic. So what is it about crisis that allows you to innovate? Lisa?
I think in whatever crisis, when we started Funding Circle, we saw in crisis there was opportunity. And I think that's the same in every crisis that we enter. And it takes entrepreneurs to realize that, to have these ideas and to change. When we started Funding Circle, and I wasn't part of the business at that stage, but it was in response to the financial crisis, but it was also something that had been happening for decades prior to that. Small businesses were not being served well. They were not getting the money that they needed to grow, to provide jobs, to support their communities. But there was a catalyst, and that catalyst was the financial crisis. And we did see this shift in how people trusted their existing banks and how they were perceived to be served by those banks. And so we started to see that change in customer adoption. We started to see the early adopters coming through. So I do think there are these events that happen that create a big momentum. And sometimes that's crisis, sometimes that's innovation. And you think about the development of the iPhone and how much that unleashed a wave of innovation. You think about the internet and obviously how much that unleashed a huge wave of innovation. And so I do think there will continue to be, as we go through this cost of living crisis, there will continue to be really exciting innovations coming out of this sector, coming out of other sectors.
What was it for you, Jaidev, that sparked that big pivot? What actually happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we thought about getting into banking way back in 2016. I think it ended up happening in both, some fairly challenging but also opportune circumstances. But our desire to go into banking was led by the fact that our peer-to-peer business was actually being very successful, and we felt we could effectively deploy those capabilities, those principles over a wider range of products. And the way we thought we could do that was through banking. But if I come back to your question around crisis, then I would say that, in financial services, and I think all of us are guilty about this, that, we have a lot of inertia, right? If you are with a bank, you're using something, and even if you're dissatisfied, you can just let it go, and you just continue because there are other important things for us to do in our lives. And what a crisis does is that actually it forces people to really look at their assumptions and think differently. For example, the COVID crisis meant that actually digital adoption, which was already increasing, actually went even further, particularly in the older generation. It also meant that consumers actually started thinking about how to save money, given the cost of living crisis, and look more carefully for better options. And that then drives competition, that drives better innovation. It also is that during crisis, the incumbents tend to be defensive. They have things to protect and kind of things to save, and that does mean that large parts of the society then tend to not get the offers that they were getting before, and therein also lies an opportunity for people like us to step in and fill that gap.
Do you think people are responding in the sector enough to the crisis at the moment? I mean, how do you rate the response, Lisa?
It's a great question, and I totally agree with what Jaidev said. Inertia does set in. I think there is a change that we're seeing now. A lot of the fintech industry has been around where interest rates have been very low, and it is a big change that we're going through now. I do think the industry is responding. I do think there is a huge value in the businesses that have been created. I see the innovations continuing to happen. I kind of see fintech, how that's evolved is that we started off, as Jaidev said, kind of focusing on these niches of underserved, but then expanding, in Zopa's case, being able to do more from a banking perspective and serving their customers with better products across a whole set of financial services. From our perspective, that's expanding our product set away from just term loans into more working capital loans. And I do see that happening across a number of fintech players where you can see actually there's a real focus on the customer and on changing, adapting, evolving to that situation. And I think there's been a few wake-up calls for us all to realize that we need to be evolving, we need to be changing what we're doing in the market. Otherwise, we'll end up like the inertia-driven incumbents.
Looking around, Jaidev, do you feel that people are doing enough, that there's enough change happening?
I mean, I think there's always more that can be done, right? But when I look back, I think there are a couple of things that have happened from a consumer standpoint, probably not as helpful for small businesses, that have been very helpful. I think step one, I think and we do love to criticize our regulators, but the shift towards consumer duty from the FCA, I think is a helpful shift for us to think about consumer outcomes. The second, I think a lot of the fintech industry was already thinking about those consumer outcomes, and I'm very proud that we have led something what we call the FinTech Pledge, which is really trying to build a coalition that helps customers actually take control and do what they can to build financial resilience. Ultimately, we as a provider can only give them tools, but they have to take the actions. And what the FinTech Pledge really kind of centers the thinking is around the actions that they can take, even during challenging times, to improve their financial well-being. So we focus those actions around monitoring your credit report and taking actions to improve your credit, looking actively to save money either on your debt or on your regular outgoings like broadband, energy, or actually just moving your money from zombie accounts that the incumbents have, which pay no interest, to interest-bearing accounts, such that you can actually get more out of your savings. So we have built a coalition of about 34 fintechs today who are focused on driving those actions. Since we've launched in September, we've had UK consumers take 3 million of those actions. Our target was to get to 10 million by 2025. I think we will exceed that. We see that as one of the things we can do, and I think there is more we can do to really help customers have the right tools and the right information on their hand, and making some of these switching behavior, if you will, easier, such that they can make more of their money.
Yeah. I guess this session, in a way, as it's the first of the day, we're sort of taking the opportunity to set the scene a little bit and be a little bit reflective as to where we are as a sector, and then we'll be drilling down into a bit more detail in some of the relationships and capabilities later on in the day. But I guess if we look at the sector, what do you think we are? Sort of kind of a teenager, sort of, listening to quite a lot of inappropriate music and untidy bedrooms, that kind of thing. I mean, how do you feel the sector has evolved? How do you think how are they growing up? How are they going to be okay?
I'm going to say early teens, actually. I think which is so we've kind of gone through this stage of focusing on like this one thing that was really important to saying actually there's a bigger world out there, and so focusing on just lending and moving into banking. Jaidev mentioned Wise, focusing not just on Forex, but expanding beyond that simple Forex transfer. So you're kind of starting to see there's a bigger world, starting to enter the world as that teenager. And also, what's been interesting to me over the last, 5 years or so, is this huge development of the back-end systems. So we talk a lot about how the Zopa or funding circle, but there's also a number of enabling platforms. When we started, and the same would have been true for Zopa, we had to do everything. We had to build our own tech stack pretty much from scratch. Whereas now, if you want to start a fintech business, there are a huge amount of back-end provision that is there, and that's probably a bit more grown up. That's maybe even into early 20s, I feel like. It's kind of that back-end plumbing side of things, and whether that's AML or KYC, or doing some of the fraud checks, or even doing some of the ledger systems. And you see these businesses actually supporting the incumbents. And I think that's a large reason why we're starting to see these improvements as well in the incumbents. So I think it's quite an interesting phase. And as Janine was speaking about, it's becoming very mainstream. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think there's still a long way for us to go. There will be customers of Funding Circle, customers of Zopa, who feel very clearly that they are a digital bank customer or that they're a digital loan customer. But there's also a number of people who every day are using Square to make a payment. They go to a shop, they're using Stripe, and they don't realize that they are actually consumers of fintech. So I think it's actually becoming mainstream, but there is still some growing up to be done. I don't know, Jaidev, where are you?
Yeah, I was going to say,
I was going to say maybe
parental advice from you. Yeah.
Don't make me feel old. Anyways, maybe a precocious teenager. There are certain places where I think the industry has done very well. So I think just as I was coming here, I read a stat that about 71% of UK adults have used a fintech service. So that speaks about reasonably wide adoption and customer awareness. And as things go, as particularly the demographic shift happens, where people who are more technologically savvy tend to grow older, I would see that percentage would continue to increase. I think where we have to still grow up is probably mainly in the sustainability of our business models. I think the breadth of offering is a part to it, but we have been lucky that a lot of us have had the opportunity to effectively grow up during a time when capital was easy to get to. That has changed. I'm never good at forecasting the future, but everybody tells me that change is going to be here for some time. And thus, I think the next stage where I think a lot of us will have to be very focused on is making sure that we are profitable, that we are returning money to shareholders rather than always expecting money from our shareholders. And I think that's the big change that we have to achieve while staying true to our customer-centric roots. So that's, I think, is the challenge for us as an industry.
Well, this leads me very neatly onto my next question, which was, as leaders in this industry, what have the biggest challenges been for you? I mean, starting with you, Lisa.
I think it's been a period of a huge amount of change. Jaidev and I were just speaking about this before, actually. If you think about the change that we've been through over the last, 5 years or so with Brexit and then with COVID and now this period of cost of living, recession, it's always changing. And I think as a leader, one of the areas we've had to be super focused on is that agility and making sure that we're able to respond to those crises while keeping, to Jaidev's point, those principles that we have, the customer centricity, the mission in our minds and driving us forward. And I think for me, a lot of that has come down to culture, right? And the culture of the business and creating an environment where actually you're empowering everyone in the business because things are changing so quickly and you're laying out that very clear vision of where you want to go to, what the mission of the company is. And for us, through COVID, that really shone through as you saw people who just really cared so much and then working so hard to support our customers through that period. And I think that was a really interesting time for us, quite a challenging time, but a really interesting time where the power of what we did really shone through as we supported businesses through the government loan schemes, as we were able to deploy about $3 billion in loans to those businesses and scale up the platform to deliver that.
Yeah. I mean, Jaidev, what were you most proud of during these challenging times?
Well, I think I go back to the time during COVID, and for me it was a great moment of the organization as Zopa delivering for what we stand for. So I think we take great pride in delivering good outcomes for our customers, making sure that they are not disappointed. And through COVID, when we were talking about March and April, where we had to go from, all of us had to go from, in-office working to remote working and so on, and we're being inundated with, customer contact, wanting to go on to the COVID forbearance plans, people who had invested money with us, wanting their money back and so on. I was incredibly proud that effectively we turned on a dime, created digital solutions to self-serve a lot of that stuff. And our call centers never had, particularly if you're a borrower looking for a forbearance plan, which was the biggest need at that time, never had a waiting time of more than 7 to 10 minutes, which I think nobody in the banking industry, in the airline industry, even came close to, right? And that was because we were able to create digital self-serve solutions and say, this is your thing, go here, and we'll be able to serve you pretty quickly. And I think it's those moments of crisis where if the organization can deliver a great experience for our customers, you can build lifelong loyalty, and actually gives you a lot of pride as well.
Yeah. So for new players, many of whom might be in this room, what's the advice then, if they're really wanting to grow right now?
I think be bold. There is huge opportunity in crisis, continues to be a massive opportunity in fintech. If I look at where we are today versus where we should be, we're really scratching the surface. There's so much to go after. Financial services is integral to everything that we do, and be responsive to the changing environment. I mean, as we were saying, if we look forward now, actually I feel quite positive about the world, and I think that we're in a good spot. But I think I said that at the start of this year, start of last year. You have to be able to be agile to what the world throws at you.
What would your advice be, Jaidev?
I'm going to definitely echo everything Lisa said. The two things that I would say is, while being bold, is also being honest to yourself on two things. One, really think about whatever you're offering and are you really solving a customer need? And if the customer actually took your product, would they end up being better off than not taking it? That's the question you need to honestly answer. The second question you need to honestly answer is, will the customer be ready? Is the problem you're solving big enough that they will pay enough so that you can meet your costs, right? And if your answer to those two questions are yes, and if you can continuously ask that question of yourself, then I think then you will innovate, I think you will deliver, and you will be successful. Of course, you need a little bit of luck, but
Always.
always, yeah.
Thank you so much. Words of wisdom from Lisa and Jaidev. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a round of applause.